Okay, so welcome to this seminar. This is the 7th seminar in the RISIS Research Seminar series, and we were saying we had a great success with a very interesting, large, and diverse audience every time. And the format is, as you should already know, so with a presentation of work related to RISIS. And I want to say now, it's not only seminars made for people within RISIS to present. So if you feel you have something to present in the seminar series, which is related to RISIS data, data sets, and main topics, please contact me for getting into the program of the seminars. Now, today we go into one of the major topics in RISIS, which is work on research and development and innovative activities of firms. We already had one presentation from Polytechnic of Milan in January. Now we are switching to large firms, large multinational firms, which is one of the specialties of our colleagues in Paris. So I have to welcome our presenters, Patricia Laurence, who is researcher at CNRS and has a long working experience on R&D activity of large firms based on patent data, European project data, and development of joint data sets in RISIS. And Philippe Larédo, all you know since a bit of time in the scene, and who is the coordinator of RISIS and a great expert of R&D of multinational firms. And I have to welcome also Gaston Heimeriks, who kindly agreed to be the discussant. So Patricia, is to you the word for presenting.
Okay, thank you, Benedetto, and thank you for inviting us in this seminar. So we are very happy to present you our recent work on the role of large multinational firms in the knowledge dynamics of metropolitan area. At the time where globalization is the object of multiple discussion and issues linked to technological sovereignties are raised again, we considered as central to study the geography of innovation at a regional level and to evaluate the role of large firms in urban areas that altogether produce almost 90% of the knowledge production. So the aim, but I can't move the slide, sorry, okay. So the aim is to bridge together two separate fields, international business on one side and regional studies on the other side. It has been recognized that MNEs are key actors to understand urban and regional development. However, MNEs are often considered as local economical actors as other firms, and their embedments in larger networks, extra-regional and international ones, has not received enough attention when studying regional knowledge dynamics. On the reverse, in the IB domain, the concept of the location of MNE's activity has most often been addressed at the country level, and there is still a need to improve the understanding of the MNE's investment at the geographical fine-grained level. Research have already shown, for example, that global cities like Tokyo, London, Paris, or New York, for example, attract a disproportionate share of MNE's investment. So we shall take inventive activities to follow the knowledge dynamics of metropolitan areas located worldwide, and we shall study how large multinational firms, LMF to make it shorter, that are top R&D inventors top R&D performers, sorry, representing 80% of the world international patent. How do these actors contribute to the MA dynamics? So let's now present our approach and results. So for making these points, we choose three. First of all, we choose patent as a central indicator for knowledge production. And we mobilized three core resources of RISIS. The RISIS patent database, an enriched and simplified version of the PatStat database. The CIB database, a subset of the RISIS patent database, focused on patents applied by the top 4,000 largest top R&D corporate performers worldwide, and the Cortex geolocation tool that enables us to identify metropolitan areas worldwide. Patents have been recognized for long as a good proxy to picture the firm innovative activities. They offer many advantages. They're easy to access and contains a lot of information related to time, geography, and actors. And following Duras and Foss methodology, we rely on priority patents that are the very first patent application for a new invention. We did not include all priority patents in our study, but only the priority patent with a high economical value, and we call them international patents. Such patents have to be applied in several patent offices, among which at least 2 of the largest patent offices worldwide. Those 5 patent offices are the IP offices in the US, the European Patent Office, the office in Japan, China, and Korea. International patents represent only 16% of all priority patents. Thanks to Cortex, we were able to identify and delineate worldwide 4,200 metropolitan areas. This was done following the concept of FUR, functional urban areas, that has been defined by OECD a few years ago and applied to OECD countries. Metropolitan area can be split in 3 groups, according to their size. The large metropolitan areas, LMA, the mid-size metropolitan areas, MMA, and the small size metropolitan areas. Within this more than 4,000 metropolitan area, we have selected a subset of 948 metropolitan areas that have a significant and sustainable inventive activity, and that also include invention carried out by large multinational firms. Patents are allocated to the metropolitan areas based on the addresses of the inventors. Inventor addresses were first geocoded and then allocated to the metropolitan area using the Cortex geo tool. 15% of the metropolitan area that are included in our set are located in Asia, but they produce a large amount of patent, 50% of the patent that we do consider, the international patent that we do consider. We have 50% of the MA that are located in Europe, and they contribute to only 25% of the patents. And the 35 metropolitan area located in North America, mainly US, produce 25% of the patents. Patents are first produced in large metropolitan area. 70% of the patents are produced in such large metropolitan areas, and then the rest is mostly produced in medium size metropolitan area. This is true in Asia and in North America, but the situation is a bit different in Europe, where the production originates first from MMA, mid-size metropolitan area, 52%, and then from large metropolitan areas. The 948 metropolitan areas produce more than 99% of the overall patent produced in the 4,000 metropolitan areas. A lot of them, by the way, did not produce any patents. So the patent production is very unevenly distributed among metropolitan areas. It's very skewed, as you can see on this graph, with the top 10 metropolitan area producing almost 50% of the overall patent. The top 100 metropolitan area produce 82% of the overall patent. And this skew distribution is quite similar for the overall patent and for the patent produced by large multinational firms. So let's now present our objective. So our motivation is to examine the contribution of these LMF, large multinational firms, in the metropolitan area knowledge dynamics. We follow the patent production between two periods of time. The first one is 2000-2004, patent applied between 2000 and 2004. And the second period of time is a patent applied between 2010 and 2015. So it's a research in progress, and we will present you our first descriptive results we have obtained recently. The first part of the presentation, in the first part of the presentation, we will study the knowledge dynamics of the metropolitan area between those two periods of times. We will follow, on the one hand, the growth of the number of patents and the evolution of the metropolitan area technological profile based on the patent. In the second part of the presentation, we will focus on the LMF knowledge dynamic in those metropolitan area, and we will follow we will use three dimensions and indicators. On the one hand, the share of the LMF patents in metropolitan area to assess to which proportion do LMF participate to the EMA inventive production. We will also deal with the technology profile of the LMF and also get some information about the geography of the LMF. Where do those large multinational firms originate? Are they national? Are they international? That's the kind of information we were looking for. So let's start the first part of this presentation in terms of result, the study of the overall knowledge dynamics of metropolitan areas. In this 948 metropolitan area, between 2010 and 2014, about 620,000 international priority patents were applied. Compared to the first period of time, 10 years before, the growth of the patent number is 32%. This growth is unevenly distributed worldwide. It's driven by the dynamism of Asian countries, plus 48% of patents in the Asian continent. This is led by mostly China, Taiwan, India, and Korea. The growth in is first from large metropolitan area in Asia. The growth in those large metropolitan areas 52%. In Western country, the patent growth is less steep. 20% in the patent growth in the US and 15% in Europe. We witness, of course, heterogeneities of patent growth rate across European countries. And for example, as can be seen on the table, we have quite low growth in large countries such as Germany, France, Italy, or the Netherlands, where there is a decrease in the patent production in 10 years. So in US, the growth is driven by large metropolitan areas. And in Europe, it's first driven by mid-size metropolitan areas. In the top metropolitan area, top means a metropolitan area with the highest contribution in terms of patent production. The patent volume growth is much faster. It reaches 138 in 10 years. In the top 26 metropolitan areas that produce altogether 60% of the patent production. This growth is once again driven by top Asian metropolitan areas located in Korea, China, and Taiwan. We also observe a fast growth in top US metropolitan areas, such as in San Diego, Detroit, San Francisco, or Seattle. In Europe, the situation is quite different. We observe a negative or low growth of the top European metropolitan area. There is one exception, as can be seen on the table. It's Stockholm, with a growth of 77% in 10 years. In this slide, we follow the patent growth according to the patent technologies. Using technological IPC, as you probably know, each patent is allocated to one or several of the 5 core technology domains: ICT, instrumentation, chemicals and pharmaceuticals, mechanical engineering, and a last domain that is a miscellaneous domain. In the period 2010 from 2014, the distribution of patents by domain is 40% of patents in ICT and 20% in each of the 4 other domains: instrument, chemical and pharmaceuticals, and mechanical engineering. We witness an heterogeneous growth according to the technology domains. The growth is high in ICT, almost plus 50% in 10 years. Conversely, the growth is rather low in the chemical pharmaceutical domains, only plus 9%. And we noticed a moderate growth in instrument and mechanical engineering. So the second dimension we have studied is to follow. We have studied to follow the metropolitan area knowledge dynamics over time. Is the technological profile of MA and their evolution over time. So our aim is to address if the distribution of patent according to those 5 technology domains in a given MA remains stable in the 2 periods of time, or if this distribution of the technology significantly change in 10 years. So in order to do so, we have first calculated the for each metropolitan areas its overall technology domain profile, sorry, including all the patents invented in this MA for the 2 period of time. So each MA has 2 technology profiles, one for the patent, one for its patent applied between 2000 and 2004, and a second profile for its patent applied between 2010 and 2014. Then all the MA profile, technology profile were clustered using a simple k-means clustering method on Stata. And at the end of the process, each technology profile of MA for the first and for the second period were allocated to a cluster. 6 clusters will built. We made several tests and end with a 6 cluster. They will be presented in the next slide. Then for each, we study the composition for each cluster for the 2 period of time. We follow the relative growth of the clusters in terms of the number of MA included in the clusters and the number of patents produced by the MA included in the cluster. And we also follow the stability of metropolitan areas inside cluster. 2 situations could occur. A metropolitan area is allocated to the same cluster in the 2 period of time. We consider that this metropolitan area would have a stable technological profile over time. Otherwise, metropolitan area can move from one cluster to another one between the 2 period of time. And in that case, we will consider that its technology profile has quite significantly changed, and we call this profile an unstable profile. So in this slide, the technology profiles in the 6 clusters are presented. The graph on the left-hand side show you the distribution of the technology domains within each cluster from cluster 1 to cluster 6, as well as the overall technology profile, including all patents. That's where you find again this distribution: 400 to ICT and 40% for ICT and 20% for the other technology. So as you can see, in some cluster, the distribution by technology significantly differ from the global profile, the one on the right side of the graph. This is the case for cluster 1, cluster 2, or cluster 6. In other clusters, like cluster 4, the distribution of technology is quite similar to the one obtained when including all patents. So in order to better characterize the specificity of the technology profile in each clusters compared to the overall distribution, we measure the technology specialization index in each technology domains. This is simply carried out by dividing in each cluster the share in a given technology by the share of this technology in the overall set of patents. So when in a cluster, and that's what you can see on the picture on your right hand side. So when in a cluster the specialization index is above 1, it means that the cluster is specialized in this very technology compared to the overall set. It's a relative specialization. If the specialization index is below 1 in a given technology, it means that the cluster is under-specialized in this technology. And when the specialization index is close to 1, it means the cluster is non-specialized, or not or that its specialization is the same as in the average sample. So the specialization indexes in the different technology varies quite significantly in the 6 clusters. In cluster 4, the specialization indexes are close to 1 for each technologies. So the MA included in this cluster are considered as non-specialized MA. Their profile are on average close to the average set of patents. 29% of MA are allocated to this unspecialized, non-specialized cluster in 2010 to 2014, and they gather 47% of the patent applied in this period of time. In each of the 5 other clusters, there is a relative specialization that appears in chemicals and pharmaceuticals, for example, for cluster 5 and cluster 1, in mechanical engineering in cluster 6, in instrument for cluster 3, and in ICT for cluster 2. It should be noticed that the ICT cluster, which gather only 8% of the overall metropolitan area, produce almost 1/4 of the patents. On opposite, the chemical and pharmaceutical clusters that include almost 25% of the metropolitan area, but it gathers only 50% of the patents. The distribution of metropolitan area and patent according to geography in the 6th cluster is shown on this slide. And we can see that we have, we can say, 2 clusters that are mostly focused on Asia. This is the case of the non-specialized clusters and the ICT clusters. In these 2 clusters, the patent production from Asia dominates. It's about 70%. Quite interesting to notice in the ICT cluster, the European production, the production of European MA is really low. It's only 6%. That could be compared to the 26% produced by US metropolitan area in ICT. The other clusters, chemical, pharma, mechanicals, instruments, are more originate for Western, from metropolitan area located in Western countries, and European metropolitan production dominates, in particular in the chemical and pharmaceutical, as well as in the mechanical engineering. So we follow the cluster evolution over time, and the change can be summarized as follows. The number of non-specialized metropolitan areas tend to increase in 10 years, but the number of patents invented in those non-specialized metropolitan area decreases. Besides, we notice a significant enlargement of the ICT cluster, both in terms of patent production and in terms of number of EMA in this cluster. Conversely, we witness a drop of both the number of metropolitan area and patent production in the chemical and pharmaceutical cluster. In this slide, we want to summarize how the different continents participate to the cluster evolution that we have just presented in the previous slide. We have found that the despecialization of MA is observed in the 3 continents. It concerns most of the time small metropolitan areas, but it also occurs in some large metropolitan areas like San Francisco or Dallas. The growth of the ICT cluster is clearly driven by Asia. As we have already said, the European patent production is decreasing in ICT. In the chemical pharmaceutical sector, the decrease is also observed on the 3 continents, both number of MA and patent production. However, we have noticed that in the top worldwide MA, there is a core of stable metropolitan area involved in these technologies with a growing patent production. The mechanical engineering cluster is quite stable. Its growth follows the world trend. But we have noticed that the European contribution tends to lower for the benefit of the US patent production. In instrumentation, it's the same way, but it's the Asian contribution that declines for the benefit of Europe. And then we are now interested in presenting the net growth or decrease of MA and patent number in the different clusters. So we got more into details of the evolution of the composition of the clusters, and we measure the stability of the clusters over time. To achieve this, we measure in each cluster the proportion of stable metropolitan area, which we define as the proportion of metropolitan area that are allocated to the same cluster in the 2 periods of time. The results show that there is an overall high stability. 56% of MA are stable one. Their technology profile is not changing, significantly changing over time. They remain in the same cluster. And 82% of the patents that are produced originate from what we call stable metropolitan areas. Unstable metropolitan areas are most of the time metropolitan area with a low patent production. We observe a low share of stable metropolitan area among non-specialized metropolitan area, but they produce a high total patent production. And there's also a low share of stable metropolitan area in the ICT fast-growing cluster. As suggested on the previous slide, the stability of the technology profile depends on the size of the metropolitan area. Higher share of stable metropolitan area are found among the top inventive metropolitan area. So larger patent producers tend to be more stable over time. The proportion of stable metropolitan area also varies according to geography. The proportion of stable area is higher in North America, with 60% of metropolitan area that are stable ones, compared to Europe and Asia, where this share is a bit lower. However, the proportion of patent invented in stable metropolitan area is significantly higher in Asia compared to Europe or US. So this contributes to explain a higher patent growth in Asia. This is an interesting open question. But we witness important differences at the continent level within clusters. At last, we characterize the change of cluster for those so-called unstable MA. Instability in the MA technology profile is not a dominant trend. It concerns only 40% of the metropolitan area, but it's in terms of patent, it's only gather 18% of the overall patents. However, the patent growth of this unstable area is quite similar to the patent growth of stable metropolitan area. So it's not a decreasing trend, but a stable one. We distinguish three kinds of technology profiles among those unstable profiles. MA that undergo a despecialization process over time. They were specialized in the first period of time, and they changed to they moved to the non-specialized cluster in the second period of time. Often the specialization is the case of patents that were previously specialized in chemicals and pharmaceuticals. MA can also undergo a respecialization process. They move from the non-specialized cluster where they were in the first period of time to a specialized cluster in the second period of time. And very often this happens when the respecialization first, they respecialize, sorry, first in the ICT cluster. Actually, it's the dominant trend in terms of patent volume. We also observed metropolitan areas, unstable metropolitan areas whose technology profile significantly change. They move from one cluster, one specialized cluster in the first period of time to another specialized cluster in the second period of time. And this happens quite frequently in small metropolitan areas. So we'll now...
Sorry, Patricia, just to tell you, you have maximum 10 minutes.
Okay.
We need to leave space for the discussion.
Okay. So let's quickly go to the knowledge production of large company in metropolitan areas. So our first indicator is to evaluate the contribution of the large metropolitan, multinational firms in the MA dynamics in terms of the share of invented patent by firms in the total metropolitan area production, as well as this evolution of this ratio over time. And the result is clear-cut. Large multinational firm plays a central role and still growing role in the metropolitan knowledge production. This ratio was 70% in the first period of time, and it grew to 80% in the second period of time. The contribution of LMF in the overall metropolitan area production is quite high and stable in Asia. It reached 85%. In Europe and US, this share is a bit lower, close to 70%. And of course, we observe a strong heterogeneities across European countries. It's interesting to note that the contribution of LMF in US metropolitan area has jumped by 8 points in 10 years. Whereas in Europe, this the contribution of multinational firms has remained quite stable. The LMF contribution in MA also varies across clusters. It's often probably related to the geography distribution of the metropolitan area within cluster. We noticed a fast growth in the ICT cluster that is dominated by Asia. In other specialized cluster from where Western metropolitan area dominates, the LMF ratio is lower and it remains rather constant over time. There is only one exception. It's in the mechanical cluster dedicated to mechanical engineering. So one of the questions we had in mind was, do LMF multinational contribute to stabilize the metropolitan area technology profile over time? The overall global results show in this slide tend to validate this assumption. The average LMF contribution in stable metropolitan area is 80%, again 70% in unstable metropolitan area. The last analysis concerned the origin of the multinational companies involved in the MA knowledge production. Are they dominantly national firms, which means are their headquarters located in the same country, or are they non-native LMF? The global answer is LMF production is first carried out by national LMF. This is national LMF plays an overwhelming role in Asia. They also dominate in North America, but international LMF significantly contribute also in North American metropolitan area. In Europe, the LMF international attractivity is quite high, both for LMF in other European countries or overseas LMF. Of course, we observed strong heterogeneity among European countries, as can be seen here. We have in Europe, we have a moderate international LMF presence in Germany, France, Benelux, and Northern European country. A higher international attractivity in Germany, Southern and Eastern European countries. The distribution of in terms of the internationalization within clusters, we have seen a lot of heterogeneity, but we find some contrasting situation. 40% of the metropolitan area have a high international attractivity, but the share of non-national LMF patent is above 50%, but their overall patent contribution remain quite low, 50%. Conversely, the 15% of MA with a quasi-exclusivity national LMF production contribute to almost 50% of the patents. Differences, I won't detail the differences between clusters, but we have noticed some, can be maybe discussed later. We have also, we did some preliminary OLS regression, but I won't detail them now. I'll jump to the recapitulation. I will now sum up the results. First of all, LMF are present in nearly all metropolitan area, and they play a central role in terms of patent production in MAs worldwide, and this role is still increasing. Metropolitan area are strongly satisfied, as we have seen, but the presence of LMF is wide-ranging among all kinds of metropolitan area. One important result is that 70% of the MA exhibit a strong specialization in one of the 4 technological domains. 70% of the MA follow the overall production profile, and trajectory of both groups differ widely in terms of the patent production growth and role of large multinational firms. Non-specialized metropolitan area are larger, especially technology stable ones, when they are technology stable over time, One unexpected result is the move we have observed in different directions, either despecialization, respecialization, or change of specialization. We have tested the role of the internationalization of LMF in metropolitan areas. We have noticed that the LMF remain dominated by different features associated with country, even in Europe. In Asia, metropolitan areas from Japan, Korea, and Taiwan have a really high share of national LMF, over 90%, where this share is quite lower in China and in India. In the US, the average share of national LMF is 70%, and the rest is borne by intercontinental multinational firms. And in Europe, national firms still prevail, but we have also an equal share from other European LMF, either from other European countries or from other continents. But the figures are strongly contrasted between, for example, the UK and Germany, which remain first on a national base. We have tested the three core hypotheses. Yes, LMF plays a central role, and this is a wide-ranging through size, geographical location, and technology profile. If non-specialized metropolitan area plays an important role, they grow more slowly. And contrary to what we expected, there is not a strong movement toward this profile, as respecialization move is an important trend. Geography plays an important role, but probably at a higher level than the MA themselves, pushing towards adopting probably multinational or taking into account multi-level approaches. And just to end this presentation, the next development addressed by three questions raised by the recent IB reviews is there's a different role of multinational firms where there are few or numerous when they exhibit similar different profiles. Do global cities exhibit different LMF involvement and features compared to other metropolitan areas? Does the strategic orientation of firms, for example, are the knowledge-based location or market-driven location of inventive activities impact on the dynamics of metropolitan areas? Another important aspect is the role of the metropolitan environment in the location strategy of LMF, considering, for example, the role of university or more widely public presence of more widely public research, the importance of the startup network, surrounding startup network, and the impact of the social and cultural milieu. And finally, we are still searching for a model to develop an integrated approach. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Patricia, for this excellent, very rich, insightful presentation. Now, before just giving the word to Gaston, I remind if all the people in the audience, you have questions, the best is you post them on the chat, and then I will give you the word so that we can manage this in an ordered way. Maybe, Patricia, you could stop sharing so that we see.
Okay.
And Gaston is up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation of being here. It's a real pleasure, and I'm also really impressed by the work you have done. You're a bit understated about it, but I think that it is an enormous effort that of the amount of data that you processed and the work you put into it. So, and I think that it will be a fantastic contribution for a lot of research in the years to come. So I want to stress that. So it's really a fantastic effort that you've done. So I have several comments, and basically they're motivated by a bit the question. So what is the presentation now was very rich in detail and methodology and data, but what is missing a bit is still, so what do we learn from it? So what does it mean? So what are the kind of developments that that we are looking at here? So now, and I very much liked the framing. So in my own work, I worked also with Ron Bosma, and we published some articles on the path and place dependency of knowledge production. So on the one hand, we consider the development of knowledge path dependent. So it's from an evolutionary perspective, from a Schumpeterian perspective, we know that new knowledge builds on top of existing knowledge. So the frontier of the research front keeps moving, building on top by recombinations of the existing knowledge claims. Now, at the same time, we also know that knowledge production is place dependent. So each location has a very specific perspective on this global knowledge development. It has say a portfolio, a repertoire that is constrained by its local capabilities, and it basically covers, every location covers only a part of this total global knowledge space. And I think that is a very intriguing starting point to take when we look at your results. So and then you made a point, and that makes the picture even more rich and more complex, I would say, is that you started by saying, introducing the missing actor. And indeed, in this research that I just described, the missing actors are the firms. And they introduce another dynamic that I think also provides an interesting starting point for thinking about how we can use these results. So these firms, of course, are actors, but they are very peculiar, especially the large multinational firms, in the sense that they are distributed over many locations, but at the same time they facilitate interlinkages among these locations and also among knowledge domains. So, and I think your research or your data allows for some very intriguing questions to be asked about these mechanisms. So now, so what I also find very interesting is again kind of referring to my own work. We looked at the knowledge production in large metropolitan areas in the United States. There was the data available. So we looked at all publication data in this case. And yeah, we saw, of course, in a way, very similar picture. So indeed, the observation that is interesting in itself, that knowledge production is extremely skewed. So the world is spiky, as Richard Florida said. So few locations disproportionately contribute to the knowledge production. The pattern there is also very interesting, of course. Is that changing over time? There's a lot of discussion, and I think you referred to that a bit in the beginning, that we see, these large global cities are becoming increasingly the spots where all the important new developments are taking place. So I think that, well, you have now the empirical data also to look into these type of claims, and partly you're already doing that. So that's really intriguing. Another point, and that is a bit more difficult with the data you have, but perhaps still possible, and I find it very intriguing. We also looked at patterns of scaling. So the scaling refers to the kind of universal observation that a lot of kind of attributes are scale with the size of the city. So for example, we know that patent output and publication output scale. So that means that the per capita contribution of say number of patents or publications increases with the size of the city. So not just the absolute number, but the per capita. So the average per person increases. And that is, of course, something that is also a relevant context for the type of research you're doing. You make the distinction between the different types of metropolitan areas. Now, also interesting in that sense is that the type of knowledge produced scales differently. So this is something that has not been researched very well, but I think your data also provides a lot of opportunities there. So certain type of knowledge can only be produced in these large metropolitan areas. And that touches upon another kind of interesting line of reasoning that I know you're also very familiar with. So the search regime approach. So what is the context, the institutional context, as Bonacorsi would call it, in which different types of knowledge? So what are the conditions that certain knowledge developments require in order to develop further? To my surprise, this type of research has not become as popular as I expected it to be. But I think these are very intriguing questions to ask. So what are then the kind of local conditions that make it possible for these new knowledge development to take place, and why are they increasingly concentrated or not in certain kind of big cities? So a related discussion is, of course, the OECD is very much involved in is about these frontier firms, so that certain type of activities, knowledge production activities are kind of seeing a lot of growth in productivity, but it's only a very small part. Most innovation is lagging behind. One of the explanations, again, is the type of knowledge, but also the geography. So it's a few locations in which these frontier firms are located. Again, your data and your methods allow for a lot of interesting analysis in that sense. Excuse me. Now, so very rich, very. So one point I have, a very minor point, but I was just thinking about it. So in my, I have a new PhD student starting also on the kind of geography of knowledge production. And from a policy perspective, it makes sense to look at NUTS regions in Europe. And so because a lot of kind of policy institutions, funding, smart specialization strategies, etc., are available on that level. And I think that the metropolitan area, in a way, is a far superior geographical unit of analysis. But it also creates new methodological issues related to to kind of the ability to connect your data with other data sources. But I'm not sure how difficult it is actually, so I would also like to hear that from you. Now, then, so the question a bit about the cluster and specialization. Yeah, here I'm a bit skeptical. So I know that these kind of specialization measures are very well known and very much applied, but I'm not entirely convinced that in the case of your analysis, they provide a lot of added value. So what you show is, if I understand it correctly, is what you would expect. So what I see also in my research about knowledge production, you see that the really, really big cities like Paris and London in Europe are the least specialized, just simply because they are good at everything. So specialization matters, especially for lagging regions. So there it provides a starting point for understanding what diversification patterns exist. And that is another point I wanted to raise. So you discussed a lot of kind of changes over time, and I think that's absolutely fascinating work. But what is lacking a bit is what are then the mechanisms that facilitate these changes? So from an economic geography perspective, smart specialization perspective, we expect that, how does knowledge develop? It is a process of diversification. So given a certain knowledge base, a starting point, a certain set of capabilities, regions diversify into new activities that are closely related to these to the existing knowledge base. But I'm not sure if that is what is driving these developments. So that's also a question to you. So, but in general, so I think so. What your data set allows for is precisely this type of questions. So we see, at the one hand, it's a co-evolutionary dynamic as I see it, between, at the one hand, developments in the knowledge base, so how new knowledge is produced, how the role of geography plays out, so where is it produced, and then the third very intriguing dimension that you add is the role of firms. So, and especially these large multinationals, and they play a very complicated role, as I said, because they are themselves networked over many locations and over many domains of knowledge. So I think it would help to kind of think a bit about, what are the kind of really the driving forces, the mechanisms at play here in these kind of co-evolutionary patterns. And then you would open up the opportunities for doing a lot of very, very interesting results. So these were the comments I had for the moment.
So thank you for excellent and I think very useful comments. I would like to give the floor back to Patricia and Philippe for a short, please, reply.
Yes, I might say thanks, Gaston, first, because you give us plenty ideas. There's three things just 3 points I wanted to know. When we work on publications, and you mentioned it for the US, there is the per capita contribution. So if you go to per capita, it increases with the size of places or with the size of places in the domain. Well, our results are far more nuanced for patents. The very large places tend to be far less productive. So it may not be a question of number, but it may be a question of types of patents, potential of patents. What you say about search regime might be, if we were able to match emerging versus stabilized nature rather than emerging regimes at large, it might be better. So we are testing ideas of using complexity approaches as to identify emerging dimensions of knowledge, and then see the role of places and the role of firms in these places into this emergence. That might be a direction, but I wouldn't think that it's search regime as a whole. So that's an open debate. All right. Then similarly, I'm not sure that when we work with large firms, the notion of frontier firms works well, but the notion of engagement of firms in frontier activities would be a better way. All right. But that requires a lot of work for us to do still. And then one question we are faced with, and we discussed heavily within RISIS, whatever we do, is what is the type of areas where to look at and articulate different sources of knowledge. So it's clear that when we work with metropolitan areas, for knowledge production, it works very well. It's far better than the traditional institutional definitions. Right? But we get the information of other dimensions at, mostly at regional level. So how do we articulate? And are there ways in which we can articulate what happens at the metropolitan areas compared to the knowledge we have about the regional environment? But there is a last contradiction. There's a beautiful piece of work, a review, probably the best one I've read for a long time, that has been done, that has just been published by colleagues looking at the relationship between global cities and large firms.
I'm making notes, Philippe. What is the review?
The review, it's in the first, is Chakrabarty and Al, and it was published about 3 weeks ago, right? And it's really it's illuminating as a review. And they tend to say, and they show that in geography, there is a trend to say that the dynamic of global cities is taken out of its regional and even its national context. All right. So it goes exactly against what we say, usually in knowledge, about knowledge dynamics. So that is really also a very important question. And the last comment I would like to do is, we think that there are thresholds above which, but we don't know which ones, above which non-specialization plays a big role in the growth. But below these thresholds, MAs that grows fast, MAs that create employment, that mobilize more knowledge, tend to be more specialized. So if you take a life cycle, we tend to focus on despecialization, diversification as a source of growth, but that might be very limited. It might be limited to a very limited number of places, while core places will like in a life cycle, will be in the specialization life cycle, I would say, and grow with it. And that difference is an important issue for us when we study, when we develop place-based approaches. And so, I fear that we tend to focus on what we like best, which is breakthrough innovation, fast changing things, while the core life is about specialization still.
Yeah, it's an interesting empirical question. So it's a bit what I worked on with Patricia and you and Antoine as well about, yeah. So the knowledge base of firms rather than of regions, and we were discussing similar issues. So, yeah. But that's for another moment.
Okay, thank you. I would like to open first the floor for questions. Thomas.
Just a short question, Patricia. Thanks for the presentation. Maybe I missed it. Did you use inventor addresses for location or SNE addresses?
Inventor location, yes.
Okay. Then because it would be interesting because you have this very large data set now for your race at the global level, and this is for the first time where you could really compare what is the difference between when taking inventors as location placer or assignees, because that's always the debate that you get from reviewers, and nobody knows what is really the bias between the two things, and that's highly interesting, I think. And the other point I would say in general, connecting to that what Gaston said and Philippe, that is the big question of how can we explain that what you are observing with your large data set, and that's the question behind what is the determinants and driving forces. So the move that you need to take is that you specify some kind of econometric exercises. I think you have already started with it, where you can try to explain the things that you observe there. And as Gaston mentioned, I think that there are two big issues to be discussed about. The one is the local capabilities and the set of variables that are connected to this kind of local capabilities, but at the same time, the global embedding in the global system of where it is located, how it is networked with other regions. That is the kind of two sets of determinants and driving forces that I would consider as crucial in such an exercise. And about the specialization issue, Philippe, you see that many authors are now moving to this complexity discussion. So that you diversify into related technologies, also the big cities, but at the same time, you should be specialized in these upcoming complex technologies, which means that you aim to specialize in those technologies that are unique, that not many other regions are able to produce. And these are considered as complex technologies. And maybe that's something also where you can put forward this specialization debate, but maybe not at this level of granularity of technologies like ICT, chemicals. This is too broad. You need to know much.
Yes, I do agree with you, Thomas. And we are currently preparing data on the complexity. It's currently in process, so we will be able to introduce such a dimension in further work.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? I would like to add a small point. Of course, it's far away from my field, but what I see, which is within the genes of RISIS, is taking into account fully this duality between space and actors. Because in your design, you have space, so it is metropolitan areas, but at the same time, you have actors, large multinational firms, but you might think also of universities, of course, in regions. And I do think an important issue is how we find methods to account for this duality rigorously. So because it's basically a two-level network with its own different rules. And I have a feeling from your presentation, this dynamics is really central, because you spoke about metropolitan areas and you spoke about large multinational firms. And the question is how the two play together. So I think this would be very important to develop within RISIS.
This would require time.
Yeah.
But one of the, if I may say something, is one of the difficulty is to define variables that qualify our different entities. So you can, if you take a variable about complexity and say, or about breakthrough dimensions, whatever you say, this is a small, all the time it's a small part of the MA that you look at, and it's a small part of the multinational firm you look at. And at the same time, the small part of the multinational firm is sometimes 100 times the whole work done by startup firms. So it's a very complex issue. I mean, the people who work on the car industry today, and I mean, there was a very nice debate last week, discussion with professionals, between professionals. They tend to say that what counts is their ability to integrate different specializations. Specializations are place-based for them. And their strength is their ability to integrate these in the firm, these different place-based specialization. So their hypothesis is that it doesn't happen at the local level, it happens at the firm level. And where the firm locates integration has no meaning. So, which is very interesting. And they take the case of, it was fun because the guys of Volkswagen say, where we integrate, there's nobody else than us. So you could not find a local embedding. And I was, Tavares from Stellantis, he says, we integrate. Where do we integrate? In Sicily, and in the northeast part of France. Okay? What does it mean? So it's also an open question for us, that relationship.
Yeah, there are also colleagues of mine working on the idea of cross-specialization from a regional perspective. So basically, they argue if a region has a relative strong specialization in two different domains, the chances of coming up with novel combinations, of recombinations on the interface between these two specializations is very high there compared to all other places in the world. So that kind of thinking is also taking place on the geographical level.
Yeah, that's for emergence. And the answer is just what you are going to study on pharmacochemical. It's the emergence. And you remember the old word by Phil Cook about where it emerges doesn't mean that where it will grow, because it will be bought by a large firm, and the large firm will operate what he called decapitation, and things will happen elsewhere. So the question is also how do you turn this emergence into real activity?
Yeah, I think Philippe is where this distinction or this duality between firms and regions might help, because strategic actors are firms and value is created by firms. And regions are places where you put together interactions between. So I'm thinking, for example, on work on laboratories, researches by Emmanuel Lazega, and the idea that there are different types of strategies which might be enabled by different contexts, for example. So maybe this might be some directions. I think some ideas of strategy must be there, because at the end, otherwise, all looks very endogenous. But these are just suggestions. Now, if there are no other questions, I think this was a fascinating and fascinating insight about the work that can be done into RISIS and how this is linked to a vibrant community in discussion about regional knowledge production. So I want really to thank the presenters, Patricia and Philippe. I want to thank the discussant who really played masterfully his role of adding a layer to the data. And I want to thank the CNR team, Alessia and Serena, for managing this online event. And then Serena, could you switch on the next slides? This is not the end of the story. So we are already planned the two next seminars. So if the slide could come, okay.
Hey, technology requires time. So
14th of April, there will be a presentation on work by NIFO on PhD careers. 10th of May, beware, it's a Monday because we have to take care of childcare duties of the presenters as well. And it's Cinzia D'Araio on basically working on heterogeneity and efficiency of universities. Invitations will be dispatched very soon, so I would really like to welcome you in the next seminars. And with this, I would like to wish everybody a good afternoon.
thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Thank you.